Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are one of only a handful of channels covering abrupt climate change. This is a very small corner of the internet, and small corner of YouTube, but well worth your time if you are a fan of information and knowing what really is going on in the world. Obviously, this news can be unsettling if you are new to this information. It is quite unsettling. If you're old to this information, it's quite unsettling. But the truth, the hard truth is better than a soft lie any day for me. So let's just get into it. So we have another hurricane gathering speed in the Caribbean. Hurricane Michael, live updates, heading towards Florida, could be a Category 3 at landfall. This is from ABC News. Hurricane Michael was upgraded from a tropical storm as it churns in the Gulf. This is from today, by the way. It turns in the Gulf and is forecast to become a major Category 3 storm when it makes landfall in the Florida Panhandle later this week. Already a Category 1 hurricane with sustained winds of 75 miles per hour, Michael is traveling north at a rate of 7 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center predicts that Michael will reach major hurricane status on Tuesday night or Wednesday morning as it nears the coast with sustained winds of 120 miles per hour. Florida Governor Rick Scott has now declared a state of emergency in 35 counties ahead of Michael's predicted landfall on Wednesday. Hurricane Michael is forecast to be the most destructive storm to hit the Florida Panhandle in decades, Scott said at a press conference Monday evening. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has mobilized resources from the federal government to assist with the preparation. The Panhandle and Big Bend could see winds in excess of 100 miles per hour, Scott said at a briefing Sunday evening, Remember, the storm could grow stronger and be a Category 3 hitting our state. The storm will be life-threatening and extremely dangerous. Mandatory evacuations were ordered in parts of Panama City Beach starting Tuesday morning. That's tomorrow. The National Hurricane Center announced the upgrade from a tropical storm at 11 a.m. Monday, making it the 7th named hurricane of the year. It's a big old blob of a storm. Michael is currently located 20 miles west of Cuba, where a hurricane warning remains in effect as heavy rain and strong winds are hitting the western part of the island. In certain areas, the National Hurricane Center is forecasting storm surge between 8 and 12 feet in certain areas, Scott said Monday. The NHS warned of a risk of life-threatening storm surge. The Tampa area could see a 2 to 4 foot storm surge. Wow. A hurricane watch has been issued for North Florida, and tropical storm watch has been issued for parts of the western coast of Florida, including Tampa. Watch out, my Tampa friends. A tropical storm watch has also been issued for the Alabama coast, including Mobile. Watch out, my Mobile friends. The storm will move further inland later in the week and bring rain and wind to Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. As if they haven't had enough rain. The Carolinas and Virginia were blasted by Hurricane Florence last month, which dumped more than 2 feet of rain in some locations and caused record flooding. The biggest rainfall from Michael is expected across parts of the Florida Panhandle and Georgia, with 6 to 10 inches expected. The coast could get up to a foot of rain. The majority of the rain will fall between Wednesday and Thursday morning. The Coast Guard is now urging boat owners to prepare ahead of the storm by either moving their boats out of the water or to an inland marina. Early preparation is key to keeping you, your boat, and maritime responders safe, said Captain Holly Nigerian, the commander of the Coast Guard Sector St. Petersburg. Oil giant BP announced Monday that it is closing 4 of its operated platforms in the Gulf of Mexico, with forecasts indicating that the storm will strengthen as it moves into the northern Gulf of Mexico. BP is in the process of evacuating personnel, the company said in a statement. Florida State University is taking early steps as well, closing its campuses in Tallahassee and Panama City. Campus housing and dining facilities will still be open for those students who are not evacuating. Students are encouraged to discuss possible travel plans with family and friends, the school warned in a news release. All right. That escalated quickly. Moving on to a little more on the, red algae, or the red tide that's going on in Florida. This is from yesterday, from the bigwobble.org. I've been here all my life and I've never seen anything like this. Florida red tide bloom now stretches from the Gulf of Mexico to Fort Lauderdale. Red tide algae bloom has now reached Fort Lauderdale on the eastern coast of Florida. The algae bloom now stretches from Navarre Beach, west of Panama City in the Gulf of Mexico, all the way down to the west coast of Florida, around the southern tip of the Panhandle to Fort Lauderdale on the eastern coast. This summer has seen the death of millions, maybe billions of marine species, from birds to fish, manatees, dolphins, and turtles, due to the red tide algae bloom, with many experts saying that they have never seen anything like it before. The latest report comes from ABC Local News, claiming hundreds of dead fish have been found washed ashore of Fort Lauderdale Beach, leaving officials to believe that toxic red tide algae has made its first appearance in Broward County. Mayor Dean Trantalis says beaches in the city will remain open until official test results from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission are confirmed. Those test results are expected to be returned by the end of Friday. Full story here. Meanwhile, Panama City Herald reports crews might need until the end of Friday to unclog Mexico Beach Canal, a fish likely killed by toxic red tide algae. Fish likely killed by toxic red tide algae bloom on Tuesday. Mexico Beach Mayor Algae said the cleanup, which began on Wednesday, would be long and intensive because workers have had to remove the fish by hand with nets since machinery can't fit in the canal. Meanwhile, the dead fish and the possible threat of more from another red tide has Cathay and some tourism advocates, yes, worried about a drop in visitors to the city and their wallets. This is probably the biggest fish kill we've ever had in our canal, Cathay said. I've been here all my life and I've never seen anything like it. Crabs are the latest casualty of Southwest Florida's lingering red tide problem, as hundreds of them have washed up dead or dying on beaches in Collier and Lee County since Saturday. Billy Norris, a Naples resident and an owner of Pale Horse Fishing Charters, was at Bonita Beach Monday, where he saw masses of dead crabs. They were all crawling out because I guess they couldn't breathe in the water, Norris said. Then they were dying on the beach. Good Lord. The sheer amount of them was pretty amazing. On Wednesday, Bonita Beach's water was a rusty red color, and its shore was still littered with crab claws and dead or dying crabs of different sizes and species, including blue crabs, Atlantic horseshoe crabs, calico crabs, and Cuban mole crabs. It is astonishing, jaw-dropping, thousands of tons, maybe millions, maybe billions of marine species dead along the entire Florida West Coast since May. And it is reaching, there's a picture here, a map, kind of showing the extent of it, and it's pretty extensive. Below, when there's a list of die-offs, I'm not going to read them all. I'm going to list this. I'm going to link this below in the description box, and y'all can read through that. So not only is Florida experiencing red tide, also Maine. I heard from a commenter today, and this is from the Bangor Daily News. Algae, almost unbearable stench, driving people away from Maine Beach. For whatever reason. Oh, all of a sudden I'm on a paywall. Hold on. No. Okay. No. How about no? All right. It's from Scarborough, Maine. This is from this. So this is actually a little old. This is a couple of months ago, but I guess I heard that it was still going on, or it's been an ongoing problem. People near Pine Point Beach are complaining about red algae by the water. They say the smell it brings is almost unbearable. The smell out here is being caused by the seaweed, which can be found all along the shore. The stench, the smell is really bad right now. One woman told CBS 13, as I walked down through, I had to put my hand over my nose because I couldn't stand smelling it. It is called red Asian algae, which typically stays for just a couple of weeks. This year, residents say the seaweed and the smell has lingered for about 6 weeks. The algae is cleared from the beach twice a week. However, it cannot be completely cleared because of the conservation easement at one section of the shore. People working at the beach say the smell is affecting business. People have been leaving, beach attendant Cameron Nigro said. They'll come and pay and ask for their money back because it's almost unbearable. They'll want to leave because they'll bring their kids and don't want them swimming in it. Residents say the algae is referred to as the red tide, and that the smell seeps through neighborhoods. The Public Works Department said it is trying to get an agreement with the state to allow all the seaweed to be cleared away so that the smell can go. All right, so that was happening a while back, maybe still happening. I don't know. Here is here's an article from Mendel. Hello. What you doing?
I'm just trying to give you something. I made this for you.
All right, Jem Mendel, in response to the IPCC report, this is from today, from Jem Mendel's blog, WordPress. Catastrophe collapse apology, words missing from the IPCC report. Today in their report, the IPCC have stated we have 20 years before a global disaster is upon us. If we don't do the impossible right now, including mass deployment of carbon removal from atmosphere using tech not yet invented, and communicating the impacts of 1.5 degree warming and mentioning a date for that impact that is in our lifetime. The IPCC have come a long way from their past reports, which mentioned only possibilities by a futuristic sounding 2100. In a recent talk in Cumbria University, I explained the role of the IPCC in misguiding myself and fellow professionals in their sustainability field over the past decade through grossly downplaying of the risks. The report makes predictions on sea level and sea ice that can seem woefully cautious in comparison to current measurements of change, so probably reflect their internal processes of consensus, which were trashed in a major study earlier this year. Over past decades, those who think things are worse than what the IPCC were saying have been proved right. If that holds true now, then it's time more of us started thinking, feeling, and discussing our way through the idea of a near-term social collapse due to climate change. In complex systems, people's choice of time horizons for future events is as much a reflection of how they want to feel and how they want to communicate as it is an actual forecast, especially so when combining so many different models on so many different ecosystem impacts and feedbacks. The 2040 date feels a bit futuristic, doesn't it? The choice of a year with a 0 in the end suggests it's not an actual forecast, but reflects how people feel comfortable talking about this topic in public and to policymakers. Some words missing from the IPCC SR15 summary for policymakers are catastrophe, collapse, starvation, emergency, apology, sorry. So what to do? Lots of things, but here are a few. Seed clouds in the Arctic and Antarctic at scale immediately and research the impacts. Research how else to stop methane escaping the Arctic shelf off Siberia and try it. Global carbon tax embedded in trade agreements right now. Implement means of drawing down carbon from atmosphere by restoring and growing natural carbon sinks, including transformation of modern agriculture. Explore how to prepare for collapse locally and globally within a deep adaptation framing, which doesn't assume or try to preserve our current ideas of development and progress. This is in itself a huge agenda involving everyone, and seriously under-discussed because it has hitherto been taboo. Do not dismiss ideas on what to do now because they do not fit with your story of self or reality, which gives you a sense of confidence or calm. Our attachment to our stories is what got us into this mess in the first place. Look within at what you most value, as if these are our last years on Earth and we won't succeed in achieving collective goals on development or environment. That means deeply adapting ourselves to collapse and its lessons for humanity and self. That last one is important because nothing is now likely to work in preventing a near-term social collapse due to climate change, but it is also important because it always was important. After all, why are we here? Here are a couple interesting quotes in the media. The report issued on Monday by the IPCC, a group of scientists convened by the United Nations to guide world leaders, describes a world of worsening food shortages and wildfires and a mass die-off of coral reefs as soon as 2040, a period well within the lifetime of much of the global population. Professor Arthur Peterson from University College London, a former IPCC member, I am relatively skeptical that we can meet the 1.5C even with an overshoot. Scientists can dream up that it is feasible, but it's a pipe dream. If you could work professionally on this topic, then consider the Deep Adaptation LinkedIn group. Let's see, I think that's it. I'm going to link this below. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, but if y'all want to read this, you might think it interesting. It is titled, I'm going to read a little bit of it. Can Buddhism help fight climate change? It's interesting, to a degree. I don't think Buddhism can help as much as any other religion can help, or I don't know if Buddhism, it's a religion is also known as a philosophy or a way of being rather than a belief system. But anyways, but it can help calm the mind and calm ourselves in the midst of this storm. An idyllic retreat in California, the architect of the Paris Agreement argues that it can at an idyllic retreat. So amid the Golden Hills near Point Reyes, California, in the sunlit main hall of the Spirit Rock Meditation Center, Christiana Figueres, or is it Figueres? Maybe it's Figueres, I don't know. The architect of the Paris Climate Agreement is explaining how Buddhism saved her life. Her talk is part of a day-long gathering of activists, yoga instructors, Buddhist practitioners, and meditation enthusiasts, all intent on bringing more mindfulness and loving kindness to their approach to climate activism, timed to coincide with the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, hosted by Governor Jerry Brown. Saturday's retreat is about an hour's drive from the city and a world away. This is from October 2nd, by the way. While the dress code at the summit in the city was business, there are no shoes allowed here. And when I asked if I could take my purse inside instead of leaving it in an open cubby by the entrance, a custodian smiles sympathetically and says, "You can," before launching into a funny story about that time his expensive sunglasses went unmolested in a cubby here for 4 whole days. I smiled back at him. I take my purse. The day's featured speakers at this famed meditation retreat include climate diplomats like Figueres, the former head of the United Nations climate negotiations in Paris, but also Tibetan Buddhist scholars and activists like Julia Butterfly Hill, the woman who lived in a redwood tree for 738 days to keep it from being cut down. 738 days. Kudos and respect. Figueres is in the middle of explaining how a few years ago, when she was working on the pathway to Paris, she experienced the most difficult personal trauma of her life. I thought, I wonder what would happen if I just disappeared at this point. She tells the seated crowd of shoeless climate activists. Instead of giving up, she reached out to a friend. I said, I'm suicidal. I have this responsibility. I can't do this. I have to do something. Figueres recalls, he says, what do you want to do? And I say, Buddhism. And he goes, Buddhism? What do you know about Buddhism? And I say, nothing. In fact, I'm not sure I even know how to spell it correctly. Her best friend then turned Figueres onto the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk whose books have become popular in the West. The teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh saved my life, Figueres says, but more importantly, they were the guiding light for her work on the Paris Agreement, helping her muster the strength, compassion, and focus she needed to do the job. It wasn't just a personal salve, Figueres insists. Thinking like a Buddha, she says, could help ordinary citizens put their climate ideals into action too. Finding strength in our pain at the individual level is what we need to do at the global level, she says. Americans are in what one speaker calls a moment of awakening consciousness, specifically with respect to climate. It's a moment of recognition that the task of protecting the planet can't be left up to politicians. After Donald Trump announced his intention to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, it became clear that the current administration can't be counted on for much. Jack Kornfield, co-founder of Spirit Rock, sees this moment of awakening as in line with what Thich Nhat Hanh has said about how the next Buddha might not take the form of an individual, but rather a community practicing understanding and loving kindness. What's beautiful is the empowerment of the people, Kornfield says. It's also problematic, he adds wryly, because it means you. That's the downside. Otherwise, you can offload the responsibility to spiritual leaders or the climate leaders. The uses of hope, the uses of fear. Figueres speaks of finding strength in our pain, but what does that really mean? The emotions typically associated with climate change are fear and anxiety. On the topic of climate messaging, some critics have questioned the wisdom of dwelling on the negative and have called for more hope in how we talk about our impending doom. Okey-doke. And earlier that week, at the Global Climate Action Summit, many of the speakers had seemed intent on splitting the difference. It's almost put us in a place of schizophrenia. Johan Rockström, executive director of the Stockholm Resilience Center, says of the current state of the climate crisis, there's never been a reason to be so nervous as today based on the scientific necessity, but there's never been so much reason to be hopeful. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti coined a term for this contradictory emotion, anxiety. It's like every day this feeling of excitement. Garcetti told a gaggle of reporters at the summit when asked about his mood. Wow, we are finally there and we can do this, and it's getting worse simultaneously. I found that interesting that he's that clued into climate change. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not incredibly surprising, but interesting. Political change often starts with anger, because I never hear anything in Los Angeles. I mean, you hear kind of like, you know, the usual like save water billboards or, you know, whatever. That kind of, you know, kid glove kind of soft sell, you know, be concerned about the climate, guys, come on. You know, but I don't really hear any like strong like push from the Los Angeles mayor's office or the government like, oh, climate change is really bad, let's do something. Like, I just don't hear it. So if they know about it and if they're trying to do something about it, I don't really see anything being done. Anyways, political change often starts with anger, which is an animating force and activism, and something Figueres called for explicitly at a kickoff event at the GCAS, saying, We have to get to the point of public outrage. Oh, we got to get some rage going. This Saturday at Spirit Rock, though, no one appears motivated chiefly by animus or by negative emotions more generally. One speaker even recalls being actively disgusted to hear a political operative say that their approach is to infuriate and disgust our base so they will go out there and vote. It feels like a cheap trick, the speaker says, manipulating negative emotions. Though, of course, it's also true that voters can be moved by a righteous and deeply justified anger. It's important to be able to feel our pain and grief, says Spirit Rock co-founder James Baraz. It's also important to, when they occur, maintain and increase those wholesome states. The approach doesn't mean denying emotions like anger as they occur. It means not being derailed or directed by them exclusively. And today it means trying to look at climate change as though the glass is half full. Paraphrasing the writer Gary Schneider at Cornfield says, if we're going to save the world, don't save it out of fear and anxiety. Save it because you love it. Mindfulness goes west. Meditation as a practice has been around for thousands of years, but it has seen a striking rise in modern America from its introduction through beatniks and hippies to the New Age movement, and more recently, the mainstreaming of yoga and meditation. The surge in interest is not just happening in California, although Californians would have you know that it is happening here first. California is a very powerful place because we are the trendsetters for the whole world. Tibetan Buddhist scholar Anam Thupten tells the assembled, we have to be really careful what we do because everyone's going to follow us. In fact, everyone's already doing so. Mindfulness techniques are now used in schools and military. Fortune 500 companies offer them to improve employee well-being and productivity. And Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan, who's weighing a bid for president and wrote a book about meditation, is saying he wants to cultivate the yoga vote. I don't know if that's really cool or just hilarious. A majority of Americans now view Buddhism favorably, according to Pew Research Center data. Though often subsumed into a multi-billion-dollar wellness industry, most mindful practices, including yoga and meditation, were at least originally intended to be free. In the West, of course, even breathing can be monetized. The popular meditation app Headspace turned peace of mind into a $250 million business last year. Wow. Attendees of Spirit Rock's Loving the Earth, Healing the Planet through Mindful Engagement today have paid between $60 and $200 on a sliding scale at the payer's discretion, with an additional $10 penalty for anyone failing to carpool. All proceeds are donated to the green groups that helped organize the proceedings. The day's spiritual instructions include the advice, don't should all over yourself, a quote from Julia Butterfly Hill, who shares other lessons she learned firsthand from her time in the tree. We look at all these challenging times and think, this is too much, she says, of the daunting nature of the climate crisis. But every action is changing our world moment by moment. Awakening to that means not asking whether you can contribute, she insists, but how. I happen to have been well designed to be the woman who lived in the tree for 2 years and 8 days, Hill says. No matter what our unique gifts are, there is a way to access them and make a difference. Indeed, I think that's all I'm going to read of this. There's not too much, oh, hold on, there's not too much more. Later, when we're prompted to make a personal climate commitment and say it out aloud, David DeSante, the white-haired ornithologist sitting next to me, offers a refreshingly non-technical idea to link arms with each other, or to link arms with others. DeSante is the founder of the Institute for Bird Populations in Marin County and will happily chat for an hour about bird brains or what he loves so much about thrushes. Did you know that they can produce two independent sounds at the same time, harmonizing with themselves? When it comes to climate change, though, he's learned not to beat people over the head with the club of science. And today he says he's less interested in offering answers than in finding allies. The mind-body connection. The day's activities focus not just on the mind or even on the heart, which is Spirit Rock's preferred organ for thinking. They also incorporate the body at every turn. A session on mindful movement takes place in a nearby meadow. During lunch, we're invited to explore the retreat center's many pathways into the hills. Before eating, we're reminded to do so, slowly savoring every bite. The tip isn't an exercise in hedonism, not strictly, A review of research from an 8-week training program developed by John Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts Medical School found that Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction program, famous for its mindful meditation on raisins, is an effective treatment for reducing stress and anxiety associated with daily routine and chronic illness. The imprimatur of science often trails what's anecdotally apparent to the discerning observer. Willow bark tea was popular during childbirth long before aspirin was an option, but unlike that $55 rose quartz egg claiming to intensify your femininity, scientific studies confirming meditation's benefits keep rolling in. Under the right conditions, mindfulness can reduce pain, help manage stress, ward off depression, and slow down or even reverse neurodegeneration. Can it help solve climate change, though? That null hypothesis has yet to be disproven. But Figueres, for her part, thinks it is a crucial tool and not just as a balm for the people who, like her, run high-level climate talks. The Paris Agreement is not about me, she says. It's about the emergence of this true love and solidarity and recognition that we're all here together. Take from that what you will. I rather enjoyed it. I do some meditation myself. I do some yoga myself. It is quite helpful, and I suggest it to anybody who has aches and pains of the mind or the body. That is all I have to say tonight, I think. I don't know, somewhere, so I was thinking, or I've had this thought for a long time, that, I mean, Buddhism has been around forever, and it's been around in our modern culture forever, and it seemingly has just been incorporated into the industrial capitalism paradigm that we enjoy now. So, you know, if it's done anything to thwart it, I mean, I'm sure, you know, I'm sure there are many pockets of people who are Buddhists or follow that path or that way, who are living different lives, you know, modeling different behavior than what the paradigm calls for or insists upon. I still don't see it being, I see it as a helpful tool. I don't know if it's a way to actually negate or possibly see a way through the climate change problem. I actually, so I'm a recovering alcoholic, and now this video is going to get long, but I'll talk more about, I'm just going to briefly say something. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and somebody I was in recovery with, I was in like a, whatever you call it. I'm just having a total mind meltdown right now. I went away for 3 months to a place to get sober. So whatever that's called. And one of the guys I was there with, we had a discussion about AA being basically like a true religion, or the only model example of a true religion right now. Why? Because AA doesn't have any money and it doesn't have any leaders. That's why I actually have a Facebook page that's, I never do anything with. There's no activity on it whatsoever, but it's called Humans Anonymous. And basically, the basic idea is that basically human beings who are not suffering from alcoholism or drug abuse or overeating or whatever it is, human beings are suffering from a non-specific problem, and that problem is outlined in the 12 steps of recovery, which is that we are selfish. We are self-centered human beings. We are self-centered to the max. And the way to get through your alcoholism or your drug abuse or your overeating or whatever your addiction is to become less self-centered. And for whatever reason, this, it doesn't work for everybody, but it works for a lot of people. A lot more people are sober than they were 100 years ago. 100 years ago, it was very difficult to cure an alcoholic. most alcoholics didn't recover or didn't, stay sober for 20 or 30 or 40 years and live long, happy lives. They died very tragic, terrible deaths. So whatever it is about this 12-step program is actually very functional in keeping people alive. And I had the thought, what if you apply this 12-step program and also the the organizational but non-organizational, model of AA to human beings at large. AA is such a beautiful thing because there are no leaders. There's like a loose board of people who kind of decide things, but nobody's at the top going, go this way. It's very anarchic, actually. And it's very, it's self-governing, it's self-rule, it's a very loose, and there is no money. The only, there's money contributed at meetings to just pay for the expenses of, books and the rent for the rooms. There's no great, it's not like any other church where there's like great coffers of money and tributes and tithings and all that shit. So there's something in there for me. I don't know if it's fully realized in my mind, but it's just a thought. I'm just putting it out there. The thing is that as with an alcoholic or a drug addict, in order to get help, you first have to admit that you're sick. And this is exactly what we're up against, right? In order to communicate climate change and the problem of climate change to people, you actually first have to get them to admit there's something wrong with how they're living or how, what they're doing. And of course, that's very difficult. And of course, they won't do that until they're in probably major amounts of pain, as with an alcoholic or a drug addict. Anyway, it's just food for thought. I just want to put that out there. I don't know what y'all want to say about that or think about that or do with that. Do with that what you will. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.